The link between drones and end times prophecy. Could the mysterious locusts described in Revelation 9 actually be drones? Yes, drones, the cutting-edge technology we see buzzing through our skies today. It sounds wild, but stay with me, because what we're about to uncover might completely change how you see biblical prophecy and modern technology. The Old Testament contains 15 books of prophecy, but the New Testament has just one, Revelation. John, an apostle, wrote it while he was in Ephesus. John and Mary, the mother of Jesus, moved there together. They lived out their lives in Ephesus, where they were also buried. Revelation was penned toward the close of the 1st century. During that period, Emperor Domitian demanded that everyone burn incense to Caesar once a year on the Lord's Day. People had to stand before an altar, raise their hands, and declare, "Caesar is Lord." For early Christian groups, this was a severe challenge. Their faith was evident. Jesus is Lord. They could not say Caesar is Lord without facing severe consequences. It was crucial to see if the Christians would firmly hold on to their faith. Even before this book was written, people were already dying for their faith. And this whole book is a guide for those willing to die for what they believe. Initially, the word martyr just meant witness. But soon, it became clear that being a true witness for Jesus might mean losing your life. That's why the meaning of martyr changed to someone who dies for their faith in Jesus. John wrote the book of Revelation, but it's written differently than John's Gospel and his 3 letters. Here's why. The book of Revelation was given to John in a unique way. God the Father gave it to Jesus. Then Jesus gave it to an angel. That angel then passed it on to John, who wrote it down for all the churches. No other book in the Bible came about in such a complex way. John wrote what he saw and heard, and sometimes what he saw was so extraordinary that the angel had to remind him 11 times to write it all down. During his visions, John was taken up to heaven, where he heard various voices and choirs singing, and he had to make sure he wrote all of these things down. We're now at the very heart of the book of Revelation, the toughest part to understand and the hardest to apply to our daily lives. We split the book into 2 main time frames, the present and the future. Chapters 1 through 3 focus on the present, and I've titled that section, Things That Must Be Put Right Now. It talks about the condition of the 7 churches in Asia, which represent all churches. Then, in chapters 4 through 22, we shift into the future. John is invited up to heaven, where he sees what's happening on earth and what's ahead in the future. The second half of the book is split into 2 parts. Chapters 4 through 18, I've titled, Things Will Get Much Worse Before They Get Better. Then, chapters 20 through 22 are titled, Things Will Get Much Better After They Get Worse. You might notice I skipped chapter 19. That's because it describes the second coming of Jesus. His return is what changes everything, from things getting much worse to things finally getting much better. So, we're right in the middle section now, where things will get much worse before they improve. God is on his throne, completely unaffected by what's happening on earth. This part of Revelation shows us Jesus as the one who will end history. It's a powerful image that can make us feel scared unless we have a good relationship with him. You see, after Jesus opens the scroll and the countdown of world history begins, the Bible talks about the wrath of the Lamb. This is the day of God's anger and Christ's anger. It's a side of Jesus we don't often see in the Gospels. In the Gospels, there are only a few times when Jesus gets really angry. But when he does, people run away from him. This is a very different picture of Jesus and God from what many people expect to see one day. This is the time when God and his Son are filled with anger at what people have done to the beautiful world they made. That's what we're talking about here. Their anger brings disaster after disaster. We're now in a time of very great trouble. It's called the Big Trouble, or the Great Tribulation. I call it the Big Trouble. Capital B, capital T. It's a time of distress worse than anything the world has ever seen. A lot of these troubles aren't too hard to understand. There are 3 sets of 7 troubles called seals, trumpets, and bowls. When you look at the meaning of all 21 things, they make sense, especially in today's world. It's easy to see how these could happen. But when you add them all together, it's a lot of trouble. One disaster after another. We're in the middle part of Revelation, and it's full of bad news. Things are going to get much worse before they get better. There will be wars, famines, earthquakes, hailstorms, polluted rivers and oceans, and diseases that kill 1/3 of all people. Does that sound hard to believe? I don't think so. It makes a lot of sense today. We see these strange things during the trumpets. The 7 trumpets are written about in Revelation 8 to 11. These trumpets are part of the 7th seal judgment. When the 7th seal is opened, it brings the angels who sound the trumpets. When the first angel blows his trumpet, hail and fire mixed with blood come down on the earth. This causes 1/3 of the trees to burn up and all the grass to be destroyed. The second angel sounds his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain all ablaze is thrown into the sea. This causes 1/3 of the sea to turn into blood, 1/3 of the sea creatures to die, and 1/3 of the ships to sink. This is similar to the first plague in Egypt, where the water was turned into blood. The third trumpet brings a disaster to the earth's freshwater lakes and rivers. The fourth trumpet brings big changes in the sky. 1/3 of the sun was struck, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars. This makes 1/3 of the day and night lose their light. The earth experiences darkness for a portion of both day and night. In Revelation 9:1-10, the Apostle John records a terrifying vision. He writes, "Then the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. Then out of the smoke, locusts came upon the earth." But these weren't ordinary locusts. John's description is unlike anything found in nature. He says, "The shape of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had breastplates, like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like chariots rushing into battle." Doesn't that sound a lot like modern drones? Let's break this down. People ask, imagine being John, a man from the 1st century, seeing something from our world, something as advanced as drones. What would he call them? How would he describe them? It makes sense that he'd use the closest comparison from his time: locusts. Today, drones are everywhere, from delivering packages to conducting military operations. But it wasn't long ago that even the idea of flight seemed impossible. In the last 100 years, we've gone from the Wright brothers' simple plane to sophisticated unmanned aircraft capable of global communication and combat. But what did John really see? Were these locusts literal creatures, symbolic representations, or something else entirely? Revelation uses vivid, almost otherworldly descriptions. John says, "They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months." Here's where it gets interesting. These creatures don't behave like locusts at all. Instead of eating crops and vegetation, they target people. And unlike scorpions, their sting isn't lethal, but it's tormenting. Let's pause for a moment. If you saw a weaponized drone spraying chemicals or firing projectiles, wouldn't it look like a scorpion sting? Could it be that John, in his first-century perspective, was describing advanced technology we're only now developing? Let's take this a step further. Revelation 9 says, "These locusts were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads." Now, think about modern warfare. Drones can be programmed to target specific individuals or groups using facial recognition or heat signatures. What if these locusts were high-tech drones, sent to torment specific people while leaving others unharmed? This isn't just speculation. Military technology today is already capable of precision targeting. Drones can deliver non-lethal payloads designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Sound familiar? Let's slow down for a moment. One of the keys to understanding Revelation is figuring out what's literal and what's symbolic. As one rule of biblical interpretation says, when the plain, obvious sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. But what happens when it doesn't make sense? Revelation is full of metaphors and visions that stretch our understanding. Take the locusts. They're described as having faces like men, breastplates of iron, and wings that sound like chariots. Does this mean they're literal creatures, or could they be symbolic of something far more advanced? If someone from John's time saw a helicopter or drone, they'd probably describe it the same way. After all, how else could you explain machines with metal exteriors, loud engines, and deadly weapons? But there's another layer we can't ignore. These locusts come from the abyss. Revelation says they're led by a being called Abaddon, the Destroyer. Could these locusts be a combination of technology and demonic influence? So what does all this mean? The truth is, Revelation 9 challenges us to think beyond the literal and the symbolic. It pushes us to consider how God's judgment might manifest in ways we can't fully comprehend. Whether these locusts are drones, demonic spirits, or something we haven't even imagined yet, one thing is clear. They represent a warning to humanity, a call to turn back to God before it's too late. Many biblical truths are multi-layered. A tree in the Bible can be both a literal tree and a symbol of something greater, like nations or people. Could the locusts in Revelation also have multiple meanings? One thing to keep in mind is Revelation's heavy use of metaphor. The locusts are described as having faces like men, crowns like gold, and tails like scorpions. These features could symbolize something more complex than insects. And remember, the Bible often uses locusts as symbols of God's judgment. Locusts are used frequently in the Bible. The book of Joel talks about 4 kinds of locusts that would destroy Israel's crops. Joel 1:4 says, "What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten." When did these things happen? Were they real locusts or a symbol for something else? In chapter 1, Joel describes how locusts invaded and ruined everything. The damage was so bad that the whole nation suffered. Some people think the locusts symbolized an invading army, like the horses mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 27. Others say the locusts are modern-day helicopters and believe Joel was predicting a future war. For Israelites, locust swarms were deadly because they could destroy all the food for the year. Locust plagues had happened before. Joel clearly warned his readers about a future time when God would judge everyone. He likely used a recent locust invasion as an example of Judgment Day. The disaster in Israel's agriculture was just a small picture of the greater judgment to come. Part of Joel's prophecy came true when Israel was defeated by their enemies and taken away as captives. There is no doubt that world war will be a part of the future. Christ plainly taught that there would be war prior to his return. Many people often wonder if we are currently living in the end times. However, the Bible refers to the last days, which we have been in for over 2,000 years. The last days began during Pentecost, when the first prophecy of this time period was fulfilled. The Bible is a book that contains numerous predictions about the future. In fact, there are 735 predictions in the book, with one prediction found in every quarter of its chapters. While some books focus more on predictions than others, the Bible is essentially a prophetic text from beginning to end. It is believed that every Christian generation should live in a state of readiness for the Lord's return. But this does not mean that we should expect it to happen at any specific time. The Bible has been 100% accurate in its predictions that could have been fulfilled by now. The remaining predictions are mostly concerned with the return of Jesus and the events that follow thereafter. There are approximately 20 of these predictions yet to come true before the return of Jesus. We are keeping a close watch for these events to occur before we can anticipate the Lord's return. Jesus told us to watch and pray. What do we watch? We cannot stand still and watch the clouds to wait for him to appear. He meant to keep an eye on the world and see the signs to prepare. In Matthew chapter 24, we see the disciples asking Jesus about the signs or signals that would indicate his return. They were unsure about what to do if they didn't know when it would happen. However, Jesus gave a direct and clear answer to their inquiry. We can be thankful to God that he responded to their question in such an unambiguous manner. In the book of Revelation, he gives a much more detailed and comprehensive response, but here he gives a rundown of the signs that will precede his arrival.
Many seem to be confused because they do not understand the book of Revelation. However, what if there was an animation showing the entire book? Well, we created that, and to watch that, click here.